to the Hub project. This is our Office 365 Omaha pre-recorded. What do we call this, Jazz? Is this a webinar? Is this simply a pre-recorded video?
Pre-recorded video
of our presentation that we were going to give in Omaha pre-pandemic. We were planning to come out and do this in person, and we're doing a virtual version of that. So I think this is airing next Wednesday. June the 2 weeks, June the 25th or 24th, right?
24th, yep.
2000. So hi everyone, welcome. My name is Michael Schweitzer. I'm the president and CEO of Gravity Union Solutions Limited. Huge big resume there. On the line as well, we're in the recording. I brought along Jazz, who's our director of marketing, who brings a whole bunch of experience to the platform. And I thought it was going to be kind of weird if I was just simply talking to a computer for an hour. So I forced Jazz to come along for the next hour, and we can maybe make it a bit more conversational, and maybe perhaps the presentation becomes a bit more authentic, is what I'm hoping. We'll find out. So about Gravity Union, we're sort of a compliance-focused digital transformation consultancy firm. We kind of do everything from vision planning, strategy, design, build, so on and so forth. We're across Canada, starting to venture out into the States, working, with highly regulated government agencies and public agencies, as well as some private agencies as well, doing transformations onto SharePoint and Office 365. We're kind of a little bit unique. We focus on enablement of our clients to help them really own the platforms, agility, and then really kind of taking a user experience first approach when we develop our solutions. A whole bunch of stats there that I'll let you read on your own time about how much experience we have in the space. But let's dive into the project. So, and I think Jazz, as you're aware, lots of these projects, it must have some automated thing moving forward. A lot of these projects are not successful. A lot of people struggle to deploy SharePoint to large organizations, even small organizations. We have,
and overall in the industry, something like half of ECM projects fail or don't produce the results intended. So it's definitely a struggle.
Yeah, for sure. And part of that's to do is just, very few people have experience doing these at a large scale. Not every organization has the bandwidth to do it properly, has the budget to do it properly. Anyone on the call is going to know that there's 10 different ways you can solution something in SharePoint. So much artistic freedom in terms of how much training is required, and so many variables that go into making a truly successful project happen. And so, I've been focusing on this for the past decade, and I think we've got a good system with our projects. And so we're going to share that journey experience with everyone who's watching the video today. So I know we can't say who it was, but if you live up in BC, there's a public agency that manages the distribution of liquor throughout the province. So they do about $1 billion in revenue. They have roughly 4,000 full-time or part-time staff across 200 stores, arguably around 500 to 600 people that work at head office doing kind of information management or just kind of running the operations behind the scenes, and roughly 3,500 people that work in stores across the province and sell alcohol. Interestingly, up in Canada, cannabis was legalized last year, and in the province of BC, it was decided that this government agency was also going to take on the sale and distribution of cannabis in our province as well. Big organization in BC. Some background on the problem space: they had rolled out an Oracle-based ECM platform back in 2009 that was no longer supported by Oracle the company. So they sort of had this need to get off the platform at some point. What expedited this need was they were moving offices in late 2013, and so I gather that this old Oracle server was a bit finicky, and there was a risk that if you physically picked up the server and moved it to the new data center, that it may not turn back on. given that they were taking on cannabis, there was sort of an increasing need and complexity around managing compliance and documents and records in the organization. And as well, they were growing as an organization. So I think they were planning to double in total headcount from at their head office from 500 people to about 1,000 people during the rollout of cannabis. So, just a higher need to collaborate and share information and so on and so forth overall. Some main goals or objectives for the project was to standardize on SharePoint across the organization for all content, to have a single source of truth for all of your content, only have one copy of that policy procedure, to classify everything against the file plan. So that sort of some added benefits there of classifying the hardcore records as well as perhaps the low value records, but putting a life cycle against everything, so we're able to get rid of the employee files when we're legally obliged to, as well as getting rid of embarrassing Halloween photos from the Halloween party as well, and kind of saving on server space and search indexing processing time and so on and so forth. The other major goal was we really wanted to focus on a solution that provides the maximum value to the business. This was meant to be a solution that provided value to end users, and primarily the goal there is to drive adoption. So we wanted people to walk away from this project making their jobs easier, right? Making the processing of invoices easier, the publishing of policies easier, so on and so forth. And then somewhat critically was to move all the content off this, what we call the O drive, this Oracle solution, before the Office move. So we sort of had a hard deadline to move all that content over there. The overall project from that 5,000 foot view was kicked off with some planning and preparation, as any large project should. Those key bits were, getting the hardware and software installed, doing our planning, creating our project plan, hashing out our change management plans, figuring out how we were going to roll out to the organization. Moving to the second phase, it was to get the software installed. Get the core project team trained up, on what we feel our best practices, both on SharePoint and Collabware, and the other bits and pieces that were part of the solution. Reviewing our approach and how we're going to engage end users in the business, firming up our deliverables, and just getting all our T's crossed and our I's dotted, so that we could hit the ground running. We then did sort of the first, what we call pilot groups. It wasn't throwaway work, but it was sort of the first batch of departments. So we were going to test our approach and philosophies and deliverables to make sure that things went smooth. And then after that, Jazz and everyone else on the call, we would kind of juggle 2 or 3 departments at a time and kind of worked our way through the whole organization over about an 18-month period from start to finish. That's for the overall project from high level. So step 1, planning preparation. Some guiding principles. Again, we were user focused. So when we were designing the solution and building things out and getting feedback and fine tuning things and deciding, even deciding content types and navigation and all this stuff, we were taking a user focused approach, making sure that all those decisions really came down to, is this navigation going to benefit the usability of the software? And is this content type adding too much detail that's going to be frustrating to use, so on and so forth? So really, really user focused, very agile. So we were, doing prototypes of solutions and getting feedback from people and going back and forth that way. Very, very lean. So we did enough documentation to kind of get on to that next deliverable. But the focus is really on investing in the prototype, getting hands-on keyboards and getting people to experience the solutions that could give us sort of valuable feedback, and then continue learning both from our standpoint to see what was working, what wasn't working in the project, as well as constantly learning how to adapt the solution to the various departments. And Jazz, if you have any questions, by all means you can ask, because then probably some people listening in Omaha in a couple of weeks might have the same questions.
Perfect. I will ask, but doing great.
Some parameters that around, so I guess around 800 users by the time we were doing the project. That was separate over 50, let's call them groups, 56 departments, right? But it ended up being that human resources, was a rather large quote department, and we organically they were separated into 3 or 4 different groups. So 56 groups in total, around 4 million documents that we had to migrate over. We had initially planned to do 2 to 3 integrations with line of business systems. So, like your HR system, whenever you added a new employee, it would go off and make a new employee file in a record category in Collabware, as well as a document set or library in SharePoint to capture all the documents for that given employee. And then had around 18 months to get it all done, which initially was a little bit scary, but actually ended up being probably the perfect amount of time to push through the organization in a cadence and a pace that that allowed us to be successful without pushing the business too hard and without burning out the team. So it was some good measures there. This is what the project structure kind of looked like. So not everyone was full time, but and you can imagine this was split roughly between us and the client. So we had 2 project managers, a PM from our side and a PM from the client side. We had some part-time IT support people that would take help desk calls for the system, a couple of solution architects, a change manager from our side and their side, Tiger teams, which for us are the people that are really doing the heavy lifting here. So these are we paired up a client and someone from Gravity Union, and each Tiger team will be juggling 2 to 3 departments at a time to kick them off and do the requirements analysis, design, prototype, so on and so forth. A couple developers from our side to help with the integration pieces, and then to help with the migration if ShareGate wasn't the appropriate tool, or if hand migration didn't make sense, then we would pull in some developers to do some migration. We had a great steering committee that was super transparent and gave us lots of good feedback. And then we had a couple of records managers that were doing the collaborative piece. So once we had built out the optimal SharePoint solution and had people using it, we would then kind of follow up with mapping all that content back to the file plan to add a dimension of compliance to the solution moving forward. So for a fairly big project team.
Michael, I have a question just about Tiger teams. That might be a term that's a bit new or unknown. What types of skills do you recommend someone have? Is this more technical role or business role?
Yeah, so I guess it kind of depends. So we typically we pair up a more technical SharePoint analyst with perhaps a less technical business analyst or information architect or something like that. So it didn't really matter too much, because they could do some cross pollination, and then if one Tiger team is more technical than another, they could kind of come in and help do some troubleshooting of a SharePoint solution or something like that. But typically a more technical SharePoint analyst who really understands the platform and the nuances of creating content types and lists and libraries and site collections, so forth, and then typically paired up with an information architect or business analyst to help with the requirements. But it just kind of good to have 2 people from a scheduling standpoint, because you're often juggling multiple groups, and sometimes you have scheduling conflicts, or sometimes somebody's sick, and you can play the whole good cop, bad cop stuff. So there's a whole bunch of benefits to that in terms of moving things forward. And then the whole 2 heads is always better than one. It's good. Yeah, sure. Good question. Our strategic roadmap. So, for this, when we work through an organization, we typically find it fairly important to do so in a very thoughtful and deliberate manner. And what we typically want to do is start off with those groups that we know we're going to be successful with, and then move through the organization to those groups that might be a bit more risky. Maybe they have some change fatigue because they just rolled out a big internal system 2 months prior and they're a little bit burnt out. Maybe they've had a negative experience with SharePoint or Office 365 before, and they're going to be a bit more difficult. Maybe their content is just really high volume, or maybe it's really complex, or maybe they have 10 different systems, or they're co-located. Whatever that rationale is, we sort of have different models that we may apply here. But the idea is that we want to find those groups that are nice and are small and are super keen to work with us, have a willingness to engage. We have that top-down support, and from a change management strategy, it really allows us to build on our successes in the organization. Because if you go into, and let's just say, for example, you grab one of the most difficult groups to work with, and it doesn't go absolutely perfectly, perhaps other groups downstream may point to that and say, hey, we actually don't want to go through that. It doesn't look like it's actually worth our time. Versus if you go through if you start off with the groups that you know you're going to be successful with this, it's a bit of a marketing tool across organization, and it gets people kind of jazzed up and excited about things. So we went through sort of every group and got a sense for their size, how much content they had, what was their current ability to work with SharePoint, give them a bit of a measure, and then kind of figure out this, it's not super strict, but figured a general guide of how should we move through the organization. Some other benefits are that as you get to those more complex or more difficult groups, chances are you'll have more sort of reusable intellectual property for the organizations. You know how you're going to approach projects or meeting minutes or policies and procedures. And so when you get to that perhaps more complex or larger or more risky group, you get to focus on that really core bespoke content that really kind of serves that group individually. And so it makes the engagement with them a little bit easier in the project team as well as on the client side. And you may perhaps get to focus more on training or dealing with what other risks or issues that group has. So we've had a lot of success with that. So create a bit of a strategic roadmap, plug that into a bit of a roadmap here. We have some blackout periods when certain groups aren't available, so on and so forth. And you can kind of see, Jat, at any point in time, we sort of have 4 groups in flight. Maybe we're kicking off 2, we're supporting 2, and we're working with 2. So we have like 3 to 4, maybe even as high as 6 groups going on at any point in time. Yeah. And that's
so you start off, although it seems that you start off with less, so then you're more focused, and then as it goes on, you can do more because you have more efficiencies.
And the project team's going through the storming, norming, forming stuff, right? So they're figuring out the cadences and rhythms, and they're getting more comfortable with their training and stuff like that. And you're working out any kind of points of friction for the process. And then as you're able to ramp things up and get more efficient and so on and so forth, you can tackle more. But typically the project team can move faster than the business. We do find a lot of organizations are really reluctant to allow the business to work with the project teams. They want to really minimize that, and I get that. Everyone's really busy, but you also can't be successful without their input. And so what we found is by trying to minimize that, perhaps we're spreading the total length of project a little out a little bit to ease the burden or the pressure in the business. But that means the project team can probably tackle a couple groups at a time and move things forward. And so typically, you're looking at an hour or 2 per week to have requirement sessions, to review things, to get feedback, and then perhaps an hour or 2 of training throughout the engagement. But certainly the big bang certainly is always a bit tough. So this kind of long department, group by group, department is kind of the best possible way that we feel.
And this is an incremental rollout. At the end of that period, they are now using it. The department is using it. It's not a big bang, just to clarify.
Yeah, exactly right. So at the end of in April here, facilities would be using it. They'd be live, and there'd be some kind of support, and the project team may be supporting them for the first week or 2 after go live. And once the help desk ticket calls kind of died down, we could pass it off to operations. And the project team is able to move forward and focus on the rest of the departments.
Right.
Create a big, huge, detailed project plan of all the activities that we need to get done. Develop our solution architecture. This was an on-premise solution. We do a lot of SharePoint Online as well. And it's because we had to go and design those environments with SharePoint and Cloudware. So that's sort of step 1. Step 2. We do the installation, training, and strategy for the project. One of the key bits is what we call the strategy development. And so I think I got to start to speak to this in a bit, but really what we're trying to do is we have these hot topic discussions that have to happen, and we know that we have some decisions that we need to make around these various things, right? And what we've kind of perhaps superficially grouped them into information architecture, migration, search, security, applied records management, and governance. And so to give you one example, Jazz, like migration, okay, well, what tools are we using? How far back are we migrating? Are we doing a mix of hand migration with some scripted tools? You really want to have all those decisions for migration baked up front, because You want to have a consistent message to the end users. You want to know what you're doing in terms of migration. You want to have those roles and responsibilities hashed out beforehand. So from a resourcing perspective, you know who's going to be doing what and will they have the right capacity to get the job done in time. And then, you know, alongside that, you wouldn't want to have to stop and have to go buy a migration tool in the middle of the department. So what we're trying to do with the strategies is really pre-bake a lot of those major decisions that have to be made that people will have strong feelings about, right? From a governance perspective, like, you know, does IT manage security or does a business manage security? And that can be a big political debate in some organizations that can take a long time. And so you don't want to have those discussions kind of mid rollout. You want to get all these major decisions kind of ironed out. And not that they're set in stone, but it's nice to hit that 80-20 where you're fairly confident you know what we're doing in terms of information architecture. You know, are we doing a global nav or the more specific navigations local to each thing? Are we doing a flat information architecture like we're seeing in SharePoint Online with the hub sites and keeping things flat to minimize restructuring of stuff? You know, security, are we using AD groups? So just kind of get those major stuff, major decisions worked out. Yeah, that's what the slide's all about.
Makes sense. That's great.
Yeah. So change management is a big one, and it's sort of certainly a foundational pillar for the strategies that we do. A lot of my personal change philosophy comes from a book called Drive by Daniel Pink, and it ties into research I think done at Harvard in terms of really what drives change in behavior. And it really boils down to three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And these are sort of guiding factors for our project and kind of inform most of the decisions and how we do things and what our process is. So to give you an example of these, Jazz, and to other people listening in a couple of weeks, the notion of autonomy, at the end of the day, we're creating a very intimate solution for end users to use on a daily basis. And they should have a say in what we build. Like they have to live with this. Like we get to move on to the next project and they're stuck with the system post-engagement. And so no one knows their job better than them. No one knows their content better than them. And so they should really have a say. And so we often find that changing the dynamic of the engagement to make it more like we're there to help them build the system. We're going to build this thing together. We're not just going to come in as a project team and build something and then give it to them, and then you have to use it whether you like it or not. And so, you know, with that, some of our communication strategy ties into, you know, promising to fix problems if they're not happy with something. It ties into the whole agile process. We get a prototype of the solution done. We get it in front of end users. They use it. We get feedback. So that really works quite well. So we want the end users to have, at a minimum, perceived control over the solution. There may be some people that don't want to do things that follow best practices, and so there's some conversations to be had. But for the most part, we want people to be happy with and to use that system. The notion of mastery. So we enjoy the things that we're good at, Jazz, and I'm horrible at golf, and therefore I don't like it.
I don't like golf either.
I'm somewhat better at guitar, and I can play the guitar for hours and really enjoy myself. And so, you know, the reason why we don't have adoption problems in network file storage or email is because they're so straightforward and so easy to use. But realistically, you know, SharePoint and even like Teams and stuff like that, it's just sort of one level above some of those use cases. And so we really need our end users to be just as comfortable with SharePoint as they are with those other tools that are really straightforward. And given that SharePoint isn't as simple as those, it requires a bit more training or whatever it happens to be. And so we very much take an approach to training like you would see in other domains. I've always been a little bit confused as to why technology training always seems to be going off site for one day and then drinking from a fire hose for 8 hours. And then being expected to use technology. So what we're typically doing, Jazz, is an hour or two per week, lecture, lab, hands-on training over the duration of the time that we're engaging with that department for the rollout, so that 8 to 12 week period. And then we leverage additional opportunities, like, for example, we always weave in a little bit of hand migration to reinforce our training and their knowledge of the information architecture, so on and so forth. And then lastly, purpose. And one of my favorite stories around purpose is I was working with a municipality up here in British Columbia, and their hiring process used to be a bit archaic. They used to print off a job opening in the local newspaper, and they would get all these resumes in paper format or through email, but they would print off all these resumes, put them into a binder, and then circulate that binder throughout the entire organization. And it would just take months to get feedback from managers about who they would want to interview and move forward in the hiring process. And so, if you're any kind of talented or any kind of good cultural fit for organizations, chances are you're gonna be picked up by another organization. So, it would take them 2 to 3 months to get feedback from people because they were circulating this physical binder from office to office and getting feedback, and it would invariably get lost under a pile of newspapers or on top of a fridge or in a puddle of coffee. And by the time they were able to pick out who they wanted to hire, they would probably have a job somewhere else. And so they were always compromising on people that didn't have the right skill sets, that weren't with the right cultural fit, so on and so forth. And so they really we built a SharePoint solution that allowed them to manage their job openings and collect resumes in digital format. And then we turned on some of those social features, and that turnaround time went from 2 to 3 months down to 2 or 3 days. And so it really had this really positive impact on especially the HR department, but even the organization as a whole, and their ability to attract better talent, to hire people that were better fit, to hire people that had the right skill sets, so on and so forth. And so even something as simple as a document library can have this really massive impact on organization, and that kind of buys you a bit of kind of positive karma, and those groups that are going to get some value out of that solution are probably willing to go through some of the pain of migration or more training and stuff like that. So yeah, so these things kind of help shape our overall approach to change management. And then which really, communication, training, and then support, what we kind of see the 3 pillars of change management moving forward. And so we have our change management guide with our communication plans and our training plans that we hash out, so on and so forth. And I've kind of talked about this, the training. So a good at least 8 hours of hands-on lecture lab training for SharePoint, adding, editing, deleting documents, how does search work, how does security work, and even show them some of the stuff that happens behind the scenes, so that SharePoint as a platform is a little bit less of a mystery.
And to reiterate, that 8 hours is not all crammed together. It's more like when you learn guitar, I'm sure, as you spread that learning over a longer period of time.
Yeah, it's like an hour or 2 per week. It really all depends on sort of how technically savvy that group is. But yeah, typically over an 8-week process. And then when it comes to even some of the migration, we'll do more training pre-migration, and if there's some very specific solutions that we've built out for them, so a workflow or a power up or a form or something like that, then we'll do additional training for that. It's very specific functionality that goes above and beyond just adding and editing documents in SharePoint. Some screenshot of material, so on and so forth. Communication, just straight up stuff. It needs to come from someone high up in the organization to sort of have some clout. Repeat yourself, and then kind of work through your core stuff. And here's an example of an email that we're sending out before each and every session, showing them where they are in the process, what just happened, what's been happening, so on and so forth. Support's the same thing too. A lot of change management strategies don't necessarily have support as part of the overall approach or strategy, and it's that post go live area where you can really lose people. So it's once you're now using the system, we always have that bit of a dip in productivity, and so making sure that the project team is actively supporting those end users as they start to use the system, and they're gonna run into small issues, like for whatever reason the version of Acrobat Reader they have installed in their system doesn't support work with SharePoint Online or SharePoint on premise, and you'll have to go to some updates, or who knows what the problem can be, but you want to solve those little issues as fast as possible. We have a little slide talking about active versus passive support, And so passive support is when we wait for them to fill out a support ticket or make a call, which they don't always do. Maybe they're embarrassed about, maybe they thought they forgot something from training or whatever happens to be. But what we found is that when we actually actively go out to end users and do what we call drive-bys, like swing by their desk and say hi and ask them how things are going, or give them a phone call if they're remote, you'll uncover more issues. And so you're able to solve more problems and make sure that they're using it in an effective way, and reinforce training and all that kind of good stuff as well. Other strategies, migration, looking at tools and processes and how far back are we migrating? Are we migrating everything? If we have, V1, V2, V3, final underscore final, do not use this copy, Mike's copy, Jazz's copy. Are we migrating all that stuff, or are we just going to migrate the latest version, right? So there's some decisions and some guidance that you have to kind of work through. Are we going to lock down the old network file storage after we've done migrating? And then that ties into your communication plan, because it'll be a fear that people have, is that you're going to, destroy everything after the fact. But if we're going to say, no, we'll migrate what you need to do your job right now. We're going to take the old network file storage, we'll lock it down. And if you need it, if you forget something a year from now, you can go back and fetch it, and then give them some kind of time frame, 3, 4, or 5 years, that eventually you'll make it sort of an access requesting, or you have to fill out a form or something like that. But yeah, so work through your migration, information architecture, like, are we doing a flat IA? Are we using the content type hub? Are we using managed metadata? When do we use managed metadata? When do we use content types? You don't want to have 1,000 content types. You don't want to have 10 content types. It's somewhere in between. It's good to have all these decisions pre-baked. Security, open or close by default, AD or SharePoint. So I'll let the people read these questions as prompting questions, but there's some critical things that you want to work through and figure out what your approach is going to be, and have some of those decisions pre-baked. Search, similar stuff. Is there stuff that we're not searching? Like, are we not searching employee health records, right? Because there's just too much risk in someone accidentally seeing that stuff. If someone's in a room doing a presentation and they search for something and it shows up in search results. Applied records management, this is getting into the collabware piece. But when we think about a typical file plan, Jazz, you're going to take into account, typically once it's become a record, most file plans don't have what we call that collaboration period, which happens before something becomes a record, because a lot of file plans come from the paper world, where you assume that you have this paper record and it's kind of not the final version of it. But are we archiving? Are we not archiving? When do we going to send things to the record center? What kind of file plan do we have? Are we going to classify everything? Even the non-records, so we can put a life cycle around them, and then destroy those embarrassing Halloween photos 5 years from now, and free up space on servers or in the cloud, which is a cost associated to it. So working through all those kind of hardcore compliance questions. So that was sort of the first two phases, all the planning and all the strategy. And so at this point, the core project team has been trained on SharePoint and the technology. We've we've gone through our strategies, we've pre-baked all our decisions around security and search and records management and so on and so forth, and we're ready. We have all of our training materials prepped, all our communication is prepped, and so we're now ready to go. And we'll test everything in what we'll call our pilot groups. I'll quickly walk you through the high-level process, and we'll go into a bit more detail. So first step is a current state assessment. So we just want to have a meeting with the group, understand who they are, how they work, where they work, who they work with, what are their current issues and pain points. We may even get into some blue sky stuff, but just really understand who they are within the organization, and just create that relationship. Really is kind of first step. Second thing is just to gain some requirements, understand what their needs are from a document management system or records management system, maybe even diving into some dreams and wishes. So it'd be super cool to have iPad out in the field to be collecting information and interfaces with SharePoint, artificial intelligence, who knows, right? But perhaps we're starting to get them excited about the possibilities. And you got to be careful that we're not promising the world to end users, but at the same time, it's important for us to know potentially where they want to take the platform or take the solution 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And if we know what their end goal or their end game is for that, then we might be able to kind of make some decisions now that may make that easier 5 or 10 years from now. Content discovery will then kind of go look at other documents. How many documents do they have? Where are they on the O drive or whatever it happens to be? How many do they have? How are they currently organized? Who owns them? Who creates them? What format are they in? We then go into, once we understand their content, we start to work with a group to figure out how we're going to organize it in the new world. We'll do some card sorting and mind mapping. We'll then go into the prototype and review the solution. We'll start to formalize things and do some user acceptance testing and some migration planning. Then we go into that migration, go live, and then support and reflection. So to dive into those a little bit more discreetly, so current state requirements, business requirements, just diving into what do they do, where does all their content live, what systems do they work with, what processes do they have, do they have any special requirements around security or search or mobile access or whatever that happens to be. Get all that documented for understanding purposes. Don't want to spend too much time on it. We do want to be lean and light and agile. But just make sure we have something in writing that we can move forward with. After that, we do the content audit. And we're just kind of looking for t-shirt sizing here, right? So we've got bylaws. Well, how many bylaws do you have? What's the volume of the drive? How many documents are we talking about? What format are those in? Maybe even get into work classification or security or external access or whatever that happens to be. But just give us that high-level picture of their content and where it lives and the volume of it and all the information that will start to formulate the SharePoint site, because we know that we have limitations in document libraries and lists and site collections and so on and so forth, and that, you know, the more documents we have in a given bucket probably implies that we need more dimensions of metadata to search, sort, and filter the content in a meaningful way, and that could conflict with the best possible user experience. So it gives us this first insight into their documents and how they're working. We'll take those major buckets of content and then we'll sit down with them with cards and Jazz, prior to the pandemic, we actually used to work with our clients in person.
Mm-hmm. All in the same room. Can you imagine?
We'd all be touching the same cards. But yeah, we'd work through this card sorting exercise where we would start to organize their documents and contents, perhaps relabeling things if we had to fine tune the nomenclature or the taxonomy that we're working with.
There are online options now.
So yeah. We have a couple different tools that we use for online collaboration. Once the card sorting is done, we might document that in some kind of mind mapping tool, which is a little bit easier to work with and store than a bunch of cards on a table. But in the back of your mind, you're starting to think, okay, well, corporate communications is probably a hub site, and major projects is a site collection, and the green boxes are probably document libraries, so on and so forth, which need content types and all that good stuff. So it's at this point that we're probably able to really go off into SharePoint.
This is also, just to go back to the mind maps, this is a really great way to review with that department before you, create anything in SharePoint, just to easily review it and to move things around.
Yeah, exactly. And we're easily move things around. And then we're not showing it here, but oftentimes our teams will also start to say, okay, well, I can identify patterns for content types or metadata and stuff like that as well. So a good document there. But we're probably at the point now where we're able to go in and prototype our SharePoint solution. So what lists and libraries and content types do we need to configure in the solution? We'll get that in front of the end users, do some prototyping, get some feedback. Make sure they're happy with it. Make that commitment that if you're not happy with the solution, we'll make changes. We may go back over all those buckets of content after the dust has settled on the solution to make sure we understand the content from a compliance perspective. So what record category are we talking about? How long will that content need to live from a compliance perspective? We may weave in privacy or other security dimensions that we might have to adhere to from a compliance standpoint, but make sure that we kind of circle back over the whole solution, understand from a compliance nature how we have to treat that content. Then we'll
so to be clear, first you kind of organize it, make sure that it makes sense to the users of that department, and then go back and focus on compliance.
And so we actually want to decouple the notion of compliance and collaboration. So we build out the business solution, the best possible business solution that supports the way that end users work, and like 99 times out of 100, that gives us enough information to classify everything automatically using Collabware. And once in a while, you might have to add a drop-down list of jurisdiction because the time frame for storing emails, if they're Canadian, may be less than if they are from the States or so on and so forth. So yeah, but typically you want to develop the SharePoint solution to map how the business works, and then once we have that, we then map in compliance behind the scenes. But we don't want records management to influence the information architecture, so we don't want to build it out according to the file plan or something like that. We then go into our migration planning. We have several options. Obviously, ShareGate has become one of those hopper tools. Microsoft bought out another firm, and they now offer some free tools for migration. Both of those are great options. Sometimes scripted is the right approach. We've got thousands of example scripts to pull over content and set metadata, so on and so forth. But arguably, where we're a little bit unique, Jazz, is we do these things called migration parties. And so the idea
is sounds fun.
Yeah, they are actually. And we do. We often will bring pizza, we'll bring popper or beer if we're allowed, depending on the culture of the organization. But the idea is that we're going to sit down for a day or two, and let's bring over, at a minimum, some example content. Because the reality is too, like sometimes you're migrating content and it's just 20 policies. Well, I can drag and drop those policies over in 5 minutes. But if I'm going to spin up ShareGate and configure it, that might take me an hour or two. If I'm running a script, it might take me a day. So it actually might be the cheapest, most effective way. The other cool thing about migration parties is that it's a chance for end users to use the actual live system in a real-world context and even give us more feedback. Like, hey, Michael, during the prototyping, I told you I wanted to capture the tax amount of my invoices. Now that I'm updating or uploading 100 PDF invoices, to have to stop and open up each PDF invoice and copy and paste that tax amount is super frustrating. Can we remove that? And so you'll work out finer points of friction that might be hard to understand or hard to predict until you're actually using the system. Lastly, it really reinforces our training of the system. So there have been times where groups felt they were too busy to do the migration parties, and we did all the migration for them, and their adoption of the system took significantly longer and wasn't as successful than the groups that go through a manual migration process. Now that being said, Jazz, if you have 100,000 employees, okay, we're not going to hand migrate 100,000 employee files. So maybe you hand migrate 100, really get a feel for that process and what it's like, and then we're going to have ShareGate or a script do the other 990,000 employees. So yeah, but we'll figure that out. We'll figure out who's responsible and who's going to do what, how far back we're migrating, and so on and so forth. So we'll do all the migration stuff, and then we'll go and do our collaborative configuration. So at this point, we've essentially ignored, for the most part, records managers and how it applies to a solution, but we'll come in and we'll hash out our file plan, we'll hash out our workflows and our policies. We have training in here, which is a bit of a misnomer. And then I got teased before for showing a training room with nobody in it. So you can imagine how much people in there having fun training. Yeah. And then this is actually the final live result we have. I mean, it's a very straightforward, simple SharePoint site, but keep in mind we had 4 million documents that went into a very well thought out information architecture, site collections, lists, libraries, content types that people really found super useful. And then we've got all our documents, everything's in the right place, right content type. This is obviously test data. And then every single document has this Collabware compliance workflow on there. So we're storing all of our contracts for 7 years after the contract end date, or whatever that compliance dimension needed to be. Cool. So that was sort of that's the process that each group goes through, start to finish, and kind of what that looks like and feels like. Then maybe taking a step back and thinking about this roadmap that we had to roll out to the entire organization, where we're juggling 2 or 3 times. So, each group is going through this process of current state assessments, requirements, content discovery, the cards are mind mapping, prototype and review. Again, this is over probably a 2 to 3 month period. Really depends on the size of the group and their availability, where we're doing a week or 2 per week of requirement sessions or validation sessions, and then 1 or 2 hours per week of training. A nice soft, even cadence throughout the 8-week period moving forward. This was sort of our Kanban board that we actually found paper to be the most effective, and so we had our stand-up every morning. And so we on the right-hand side, we have all of the departments, if you will, along the y-axis, and along the top x-axis there we had sort of the current status of those deliverables, right? So all the SharePoint configuration, collaborative configuration, the requirements document, and each of those documents would be in a different state of that process. And then anything outside of the departmental stuff, we would have in the left-hand Kanban board. So just be any kind of, in boosting the performance of the servers, or doing our change management strategy, or doing a retrospective. This is actually really cool. So, and I'll give credit to Mark, who is our counterpart there at the organization, who came with this idea where, because we were moving offices and we were moving systems, we built out in our project room, we had a dedicated project room, and we built out this sort of flow to kind of show groups where they were in this process. And it was a great communication tool, and it was a fun communication tool. But what I wasn't expecting is that it actually encouraged the group to engage with this, because what we actually found was that when they saw another group get ahead of them in the race, so to speak, it actually motivated those groups to carve out time. And so it was really engaging and motivating change management tool that we're going to try and work into all of our projects going forward. So it was just that effective.
Mm-hmm. Competition always works.
Yeah, and it's sort of a really simple gamification of the system, right?
Yes, that's good.
And then on top of that, we built our reports so we can kind of see, for each site, how much activity we had, how many documents are being added, how many records are being declared. This is an example report that we have as part of our collaborative reporting pack.
This is built on Power BI, correct?
Yeah, Power BI against the collaborative database. And so the blue area are all the documents that were added to the system that were declared as records. They were locked down and protected. The potential records, the gray area, are the number of records that we know what they are from a compliance standpoint, but they're still being collaborated on and still being worked on. And so we don't want to declare those yet, for fear that we're going to encourage people to walk away from the system and store it in Dropbox or the desktop, or who knows where. And then orange is the uncategorized stuff. And in this case, it's a little bit large, but this also means this is probably just the current 2 or 3 departments that we're currently working with and onboarding and doing migration, but haven't actually done the action of classifying that content back to the file plan. So you can, of course, drill into all that stuff. And then we would do retrospective. So we would go through at the end of the
so that's actually really cool, because your records management system is only as good if people use it, right? You can have the best system in the world, if no one uses it, it's useless. So this shows you also how engaged people are, what's going into the system.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so it does show us sort of how successful that we were after the fact. And you can dive into, you can see on the left-hand side, we can actually filter based on site collection or department, and sort of see the level of engagement we're getting per group. And it actually used to be, both in Canada and the US, it used to be that if you had gone through the lengths of building out a records management system, if it came to some kind of litigious situation and you were in front of the courts, and you could say, well, if we built a system, it's not our fault that no one's using it, that's no longer a valid excuse. You really do have to ensure that people are adopting the system. And so this is, we have all that philosophy on change management and adoption, and the mastery, the purpose, the autonomy, all that good stuff goes into doing everything we can to get the end users engaged, to build a system together and get them adopting it. And then we can go check afterwards and see what kind of level of adoption we have. But it was kind of cool to sort of see day after day hundreds, thousands of net new documents being added on a daily basis, and it was rewarding to see the adoption. And then doing a bit of a retrospective. In this case, we're using a virtual tool, but getting feedback from people and what was working, what wasn't working, what was frustrating, what was really good, and all that kind of good stuff. So going through and then taking that in and folding that into the next batch of groups and our next projects. So that result, kind of going back, I would say 10 weeks was the average duration of engagement per department. So from the kickoff to the final sign off and giving them over to the operations, about 10 weeks, 2.5 months. The lowest is about 6 weeks. The longest is about 16 weeks. The effort from our standpoint on average is 200 hours per group. Smallest effort was 160 hours, the largest being 400 hours for one of the larger complex groups. And then the average time required from each department was around 40 hours per for the entire engagement. So that includes 8 hours of migration, 8 hours of training, some requirements analysis, design, support, so on and so forth. Retrospective, everything all tied up and spread over 12 weeks, 12 to 16 weeks. So you're looking at 3 to 4 hours per week per department on average. End result, 56 departments onboarded, 800 users trained, 4 million documents migrated. We ended up doing one integration, 18 months end to end. We really did truly get 100% adoption of the platform with thousands of documents added and classified every day, which is super rewarding and exciting. It might be interesting from a technical perspective. So some people are afraid of content types. Some people abuse content types. We have a whole strategy around it where, you really have to validate the rationale for creating a content type, or is it really important? Is it high volume? Is it high value? And then in some cases, we can have more generic content types. So what we've ended up with is around 450 content types in total, of varying degrees of specificity and detail. So sometimes they're super generic content types like documents by department or meeting minutes, and sometimes they're super specific like the engineering group procurement contract content type. And so content types really are a bit of an art form, but that's a good stat to know. 300 site collections. We kind of went for that flat-ish hub type thing, even though this is an on-prem solution. 25,000 document libraries, and everything is classified against the file plan. So even our low value transitory or convenience files and stuff like that, they all are classified and have a life cycle working against them in Collabware. Some great quotes for directors, just super happy with the outcome. One of my favorite things was we go through this journey with the group, and it's very intimate. We have these sessions and we talk about their dreams around content, and we have these migration parties, and we bring food and we try and make it fun. And they work with the same group of people throughout the entire journey. So we don't hand off train to a trainer, because that's a missed opportunity to kind of really cement that relationship with that given department. And so Diana and Pauline, two of the people that work on this specific group, actually got a thank you card from the group because they were just so happy with the process and the outcome and what we built for them and made their jobs a little bit easier. So I was really rewarding to see that. Here's some actual stats that we got to pull out. And so, not perfect, but big picture, we're averaging between 4.1 and 4.2 of, was it easy to learn? Do they have good confidence using it? Is it easy to search? Has the confidence of them find the right version gone up? Was it easy to share? Is it saving time? So overall, a relatively positive bit of feedback from the end users to see that all their efforts were worth it. Some lessons that we learned. Top-down support is critical. We really need managers and executives to buy in. The more bespoke the solution, the more ROI for the end user, the more they're going to use it. And we often find this with people as they assume that, well, if you go build a site for HR, let's just give that site to IT. And it's like, well, no, but we're building a very, very specific solution for HR that has employee files and grievances and job descriptions, and you just don't have that content in IT. So you really want to be a purposeful, bespoke solution you're building. Obviously, you reuse components where you can. like meeting minutes and projects, and then where the content is bespoke and unique, and which is typically the high value content for a given group, you really want to invest there. The more involvement from end users, the better off you are, which can be scary for some organizations. But as you saw, a couple hours a week, hopefully you can make time for that. It's only over a 12-week period. Communicating consistently and multiple times. That strategy of rolling out to the most likely groups to be successful through to the most difficult ones is great. And then, really in-person training at minimum. I've seen organizations that try to roll out SharePoint or Office 365 with like a half-hour video, and they're just, everyone complains about it, that they have no idea what's going on, and they just need that training. And again, as I alluded to, it's a great opportunity for the group that's engaging with that business, the tiger team, if you will, to cement a relationship and build up some camaraderie with the department. It's actually six lessons.
Mm-hmm. You can't see me, but I'm nodding, Michael. I'm just nodding.
Excellent. So does anyone on watching the video have a question? That's a bit of a joke because this is recorded 2 weeks ago. But if you do, you can certainly email me or reach out to us. There's our website details. But certainly happy to answer any questions. Jazz, did you have any questions while we're?
I answered throughout, so yeah, you answered all my questions. And just for people that didn't know as well, maybe an overview of Collabware. Don't know if we mentioned that. What is Collabware?
Yeah, great. So Collabware is a third-party add-on for SharePoint on-premise, and CollabSpace is their cloud-based product. And so both those are adding a highly sophisticated, rich dimension of records management and compliance to SharePoint and Office 365. Good point. I talk about Collabware every day, so I'd miss the importance of calling out what Collabware is. Great question. But hope you're all safe and healthy in Omaha. And once the border opens up, if you're ever up in Vancouver, look us up.
Hopefully we can come to the U.S. as well. Hope everybody stays well.
Sure. I'm going to have to go see if I can't get a Nebraska steak at our local markets here and have one in just because. But yeah, excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.